night train through the rainforest. The rain had already been falling for hours when Daniel stepped onto the small wooden platform of the remote rainforest station. It wasn't a real station anymore, at least not in the way most people imagined one. It was just a long, covered shelter, open on all sides, with old lanterns hanging from the beams and a single metal bench that had been worn smooth by countless travelers from decades past. The air was warm and heavy, smelling faintly of wet leaves, damp earth, and the faint sweetness that came from the flowering vines climbing everywhere like green waterfalls. A soft mist rolled in low layers across the ground, swirling around Daniel's shoes as he paused to look out into the vast darkness beyond the platform. The rainforest stretched endlessly in every direction, its tall trees rising like black silhouettes against a sky that flashed occasionally with distant lightning. Each time the sky lit up, he could see the outlines of the hills and the massive canopy of leaves that shimmered under the falling rain. The only sound was the constant pattering of water. It hit the roof of the shelter, dripped steadily from its edges, and danced across the leaves in countless tiny rhythms. Somewhere far off, a frog croaked, followed by the gentle chirp of crickets that never seemed bothered by weather. Daniel tightened his jacket slightly, not because it was cold, but because the humidity wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He checked his small travel bag, then turned when he heard a faint, distant rumble. It was soft at first, blending easily with the thunder in the distance. But then it grew louder, steadier, more rhythmic. A train, his train, the night train that crossed the rainforest only once each evening. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform just as the dim beam of the locomotive's light appeared between the trees. It cut through the mist like a slow-moving star, illuminating the raindrops as they fell in long silver streaks. The train's engine exhaled a long, low hiss, echoing through the tall trunks before the cars rolled fully into view. The carriages were old, paint faded to a soft blue, and small lamps inside each compartment cast a warm golden glow through the rain-soaked windows. Daniel felt something inside him relax at the sight. He had taken this train once before, many years ago, and even then it had seemed to move at a pace dictated not by tracks or schedules, but by the forest itself. The train slowed until it hummed gently beside the platform. The door to the nearest carriage creaked open, releasing a puff of warm interior air scented faintly with old wood and tea. "Evening," a soft voice greeted. The cabin attendant, an older man with silver hair and soft eyes, nodded to him with a calmness that made Daniel feel as though he'd walked into a memory instead of a train. "You're right on time," the attendant said. "The rain slowed us down a little, but she still runs faithfully." Daniel stepped inside and wiped the droplets from his hair. The interior lights were dim, with a warm amber softness that made every shadow gentle instead of dark. The wooden floors creaked lightly under his shoes as he moved down the hallway, passing closed compartments where the glow of small lamps spilled under each door. "You're in the second compartment on the left," the attendant added, guiding him with a small gesture. "Tea will be served once we're moving again." "Thank you," Daniel replied quietly, already feeling the peaceful weight of the journey settling over him. He found his compartment easily, a small private room with a wide window, a cushioned seat that folded into a bed, and a small table where a single lantern flickered with a mellow flame. Outside the window, rain streamed in endless rivers, distorting the outlines of the massive trees as the train began to pull away from the platform. The wheels started their steady rhythm. Clack, clack, clack. A sound that seemed designed for sleep. Daniel set his bag aside, then sank onto the cushioned seat. The lantern beside him swayed slightly with the motion of the train, casting soft shadows that made the room feel like it was moving gently through a dream. As the rainforest slid past outside, the darkness felt alive, not threatening, but full of soft layers of sound. Rain, wind, the rustling of leaves, and the distant murmur of streams swollen by the storm. A knock sounded lightly at the compartment door. When Daniel opened it, the attendant stood with a small wooden tray. On it steamed a delicate ceramic cup filled with warm herbal tea. "Rainy nights are best with something warm," the attendant said. "Helps the journey feel slower." Daniel accepted it with a grateful nod. Thank you. It smells wonderful. Blossom leaf and forest mint, the attendant replied, picked not far from here. With another nod, he moved on, his footsteps fading down the softly lit hallway. Daniel sat by the window and lifted the cup, letting the rising steam warm his face. The tea tasted earthy and slightly floral, comforting in a way that felt ancient, as if generations of travelers before him had sipped the same mixture while crossing this same rainforest under a similar rain. Outside, the scenery unfolded slowly. Thick clusters of palms, towering kapok trees, long hanging vines that swayed in the wind. Occasionally, a flash of lightning revealed an entire valley of mist beneath them, the glow illuminating the dense green world for only a heartbeat before plunging it back into shadow. The train rocked in a gentle, soothing motion. Daniel leaned back slightly, letting his eyes drift between the lantern's flicker and the rain-streaked glass. His mind wandered, not to worries or plans, but to small things: the scent of the tea, the softness of the seat cushion, the way the wheels hummed like a lullaby. After a while, he finished the tea and placed the cup carefully on the table. He rested his elbow against the window frame, watching droplets race each other down the glass. Every now and then, the train passed over small bridges. He could hear the echo of rushing water below, the sound deepening the atmosphere. The rain never let up, but it changed its rhythm, sometimes soft, sometimes heavy, sometimes a whisper, other times a full chorus. He had no destination to rush toward. This journey was the destination itself. The night deepened. The rainforest seemed to fold around the train like a living tunnel of leaves and branches. Fireflies occasionally flickered in the darkness, tiny green sparks weaving in and out of view. Their reflections danced on the wet railings and window panes. The warmth from the lantern filled the compartment, creating a small cocoon of comfort. Daniel loosened his jacket, feeling the muscles in his shoulders relax. He closed his eyes for a moment, not fully asleep, but drifting in that gentle space between waking and dreaming when the train slowed unexpectedly. The wheels hissed through puddles, the carriage shifting slightly. Daniel opened his eyes and sat up, listening. Through the rain-speckled window, he saw what looked like a clearing opening up ahead. The trees gave way to a wider stretch of land where tall grasses swayed under the storm. A small river ran alongside the tracks, its surface catching the lantern reflections from the train. The train moved so slowly now that Daniel could hear frogs calling from the riverbank. After a minute, he spotted something else. A small wooden hut stood alone near the river, smoke curling softly from its chimney. A faint yellow glow seeped from the cracks around its shuttered windows. It looked like a place untouched by time, belonging entirely to the forest. Daniel watched it disappear behind them as the train gradually accelerated again, leaving the little hut hidden once more beneath layers of mist. He wondered briefly who lived there. Someone who enjoyed the quiet, he imagined. Someone who loved the rain. But the thought drifted away as the train settled back into its rhythmic motion. Another knock touched the door. This time, when Daniel opened it, he found the attendant again, holding a folded blanket. "It gets cooler later," he said kindly. "Thought you might want this." Daniel accepted it, the fabric soft and smelling faintly of cedar. "Thank you," he said again. "Rest as you like. We won't stop again for quite a while. The forest is calm tonight. It's a good night for sleeping." After the attendant left, Daniel spread the blanket over his legs and leaned back once more. He listened to the rainfall, the subtle creaking of the wooden carriage, the distant rumble of thunder fading deeper into the wilderness. The lantern's light dimmed slightly as if settling into its own quiet breathing. Outside, vines brushed softly against the window as the train curved along a bend. Daniel let his eyes close again, and he let the night train carry him deeper into the heart of the rainforest. The wheels hummed, the rain whispered. The world felt distant, softened by darkness and mist. And Daniel drifted. Not asleep yet, just gently floating in the warmth of the moment. As the rainforest opened before him like an endless, tranquil dream, the train drifted deeper into the rainforest as Daniel rested, wrapped in the cedar-scented blanket. The rhythmic motion lulled his thoughts into a slow, drifting current. He wasn't fully asleep, but he felt suspended in the kind of calm that only long night journeys could bring, where time didn't quite matter, and the world outside moved just slowly enough to soothe every sense. At some point, without realizing it, he must have slipped into a very light sleep. When he blinked his eyes open again, the lantern in his compartment had grown dimmer, as if the flame inside had curled up to rest as well. The train had changed its sound too, still gentle, but now accompanied by a deeper echo, a soft resonance beneath the tracks. Daniel sat up slightly and glanced toward the window. Outside, the rainforest had become denser. Tall trunks pressed close to the tracks, their branches arching overhead and creating a natural canopy so thick that even the rainfall softened to a muffled patter. The droplets that reached the window were slower, heavier, collecting and rolling down in long lines. Lightning flickered faintly above the trees, illuminating only the higher reaches of the canopy. Down here, near the tracks, everything felt enclosed, protected, as though the forest held the train within its arms. Daniel stretched, feeling the blanket slide softly down his legs. He stood for a moment, adjusting to the gentle sway of the carriage. The air inside was still warm, smelling faintly of the wooden walls and the tea he had finished earlier. He stepped closer to the door and slid it open just enough to peek down the hallway. The corridor was dim and silent. The lamps were spaced far apart, casting long amber shadows across the polished wooden floor. Somewhere further down the train, a kettle whistled quietly, a soft, comforting sound that made Daniel smile. Even at this hour, someone was boiling water. Perhaps another traveler unable to sleep, or perhaps the attendant tending to his nighttime routines. Daniel returned to the window and eased onto the cushioned seat. The forest outside shifted slowly, the train gliding along curves that followed the natural formation of the land. Every now and then, the thin outlines of massive roots appeared near the tracks, twisting and coiling like ancient sculptures. He felt the urge to open the window just slightly. He slid it down an inch, letting the humid night air drift into the compartment. A faint breeze carried the scent of rain, moss, and deep forest soil. The sound of the rain became clearer, gentle, steady, forming a soft, natural melody that harmonized with the hum of the train. He breathed in deeply. It felt like the forest itself was breathing with him. Minutes passed in peaceful silence. The train continued its steady pace, and Daniel felt himself growing comfortable again. But then he noticed something new, a faint glow ahead, low to the ground, shimmering between the trees. At first he thought it might have been reflections on wet leaves, but as the train drew closer, the glow became clearer. Small lanterns, dozens of them. They hung from wooden poles lining a narrow clearing, their warm golden light swaying slightly with the rain. The lanterns marked a small wayside stop, not an official station, but a place where people in remote villages could wait for the passing train. The train slowed as it approached, not stopping fully, but easing into a quiet glide so that anyone waiting could climb aboard if they wished. But tonight, no one stood beneath the shelter. The lanterns glowed alone in the night, casting pools of warm light onto the wet ground. As the train passed, Daniel watched them fade into the darkness behind him, like floating fireflies left suspended in the rain. The moment was strangely comforting. Even in the deepest part of the rainforest, there were signs of people. Quiet, gentle reminders that he wasn't the only soul awake in this vast wilderness. He leaned back, pulling the blanket over his lap once more. Just as he settled in, another soft knock touched the door. Daniel opened it slightly to find the cabin attendant again, holding a fresh teapot and a small cup. "Thought you might like a refill," the attendant said with a quiet smile. "It's a long night, and the rain doesn't seem to be in any hurry to stop." Daniel gratefully stepped aside as the attendant entered to place the teapot on the table. The faint floral aroma drifted through the air as soon as the lid lifted. "Thank you," Daniel said softly. "It's been a beautiful ride so far." The attendant nodded, his eyes warm and reflective. "She's a good train," he said gently. "Knows these tracks better than anyone, takes her time, lets the forest guide her." Daniel chuckled lightly. "It feels that way." "If you need anything," the attendant added, "I'll be in the front car for a while, but mostly everyone is asleep. Nights like this, they make the journey peaceful." He gave a small nod and stepped back into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind him. Daniel poured himself a cup of tea, letting the steam curl upward in soft ribbons. He held the cup carefully, savoring the warmth against his hands, then turned his gaze once more toward the dark and misty forest outside. The rain thinned slightly, becoming softer, more like a delicate drizzle. The train entered a valley where the trees parted enough to reveal a wide expanse of calm water. A lake, still and dark, stretching far along the tracks. Mist rose from its surface, drifting like low clouds illuminated by the faint glow from the train windows. Ripples formed gently as raindrops touched the water, each one vanishing into the surface without a trace. The reflection of the train shimmered across the lake, a trail of glowing, golden rectangles sliding steadily through the night. Daniel couldn't help but watch the scene unfold with quiet awe. There was something deeply serene about bodies of water at night, especially ones hidden in the heart of the rainforest, tucked between hills and thick vegetation. The train curved along the lake's edge, and the view remained beside him for several long minutes. He felt as though he were floating beside it, gliding across the water in perfect calm. Eventually, the lake disappeared behind the dense walls of trees once more. Daniel set his empty teacup on the table and stretched his legs out. The blanket's weight felt reassuring, grounding him gently as the train swayed through another bend. His thoughts drifted again, not to anything urgent or heavy, but to soft memories of nights spent traveling before. The sound of rain on hostel roofs, the warmth of small lamps in quiet guest houses, the feeling of moving from place to place with no strict timetable, letting the world unfold at its own pace. The train's wheels slowed. Daniel opened his eyes, unsure how long he had drifted in that peaceful haze. The forest around them had opened again, revealing a much wider terrain. Hills rose on both sides, covered in thick layers of trees and mossy rock. The rain had grown lighter still, more a mist than rainfall now. As the train climbed gently, Daniel felt a subtle change in the air. It became cooler, carrying a faint scent of pine, mixing with the deeper forest aroma. The higher elevation brought a crispness that refreshed his senses. He stood and moved toward the window, placing his hand lightly against the cool glass. And then he saw something remarkable. The train emerged onto an old wooden trestle bridge stretching across a gorge. Beneath it, far below, rushed a powerful river swollen by the storm. The view extended endlessly in both directions, dark green hills rolling out into the distance, blanketed in morning mist that glowed faintly with the first hints of dawn. The sky was still mostly night, but a deep blue tint had begun to creep along the horizon. The storm clouds were thinning, allowing the earliest light to filter through. Daniel watched in silence as the train crossed the bridge. The sound changed, the wheels echoed with a deep wooden resonance, steady and solid. The river's roar beneath them blended with the soft hum of the engine. When they reached the other side, the train slipped back into the protection of the trees. But something about the world felt different now, softer, lighter, as though morning was announcing itself quietly, respectfully, not wanting to disturb the night's peace too suddenly. Daniel eased back onto the seat, drawing the blanket over him again. His breathing slowed. His eyes grew heavy. The lantern flickered once, twice, then steadied. The rain outside slowed to a mere whisper. And the rainforest began to glow, just barely, with the earliest promise of dawn. The train continued its peaceful journey, rocking gently, faithfully carrying Daniel through a world of mist and quiet awakening. He closed his eyes again, letting the serenity of the moment settle into him completely. Soon, he drifted into a calm, dreamless sleep, carried gently by the night train, through the heart of the rainforest. As the first light of morning touched the treetops, Snowbound Express through the winter PINES. The snow had already begun to fall when Lucas stepped out of the small town station and onto the platform. It wasn't the sharp, hurried kind of snow that stung the skin and whipped across the streets. It was the slow, drifting kind that seemed to take its time, floating in wide, soft flakes that turned the world quiet. He pulled his wool scarf a little tighter around his neck and took a moment to just stand there, breathing in the cold evening air. The station was small, with just 2 tracks and a narrow platform painted in faded yellow lines. A row of old lamps hummed softly overhead, casting warm circles of light onto the snow-dusted concrete. Beyond the platform, the world faded into a blur of white and shadow, dark pine trees rising tall and still, their branches already carrying a growing layer of snow. The sky above them was a deep blue-gray, the last traces of daylight swallowed by the incoming storm. From somewhere down the tracks came a distant, low horn. Lucas turned his head toward the sound. It came again, closer this time, soft but unmistakable, a long, low call of announcement, as if the train itself was gently reminding the sleeping town that it still came through, even on nights like this. He felt a faint, familiar warmth in his chest. As a child, he had loved trains, not for the destinations, but for the feeling of being carried. The soft vibration beneath his feet, the way the world passed by outside the window, the sense that for a while, he didn't have to do anything except sit and let the journey happen. Now, years later, standing alone on the snowy platform, he felt that same quiet anticipation. The wind picked up slightly, brushing flakes against his cheeks. The sound of the horn came one more time, and then he saw it. A soft glow in the distance, 2 beams of light cutting through the snow. The train emerged slowly from the white, its dark shape rolling forward like a shadow given form. The engine passed first, its metal sides damp with melting snow, followed by the carriages, dark blue, lined with windows that glowed a gentle, warm gold. Snowflakes glittered in the lights, swirling in the air as the train eased into the station with a low, steady rumble. It wasn't a busy route. This was the night train that crossed through the mountains and forests, connecting scattered towns that slept early and woke with the sun. Tonight, Lucas seemed to be the only passenger waiting at this station. The brakes hissed softly as the train came to a stop. The nearest carriage door slid open with a quiet clank. For a moment, warm air drifted out, a soft breath of heat carrying the faint sense of tea, old wood, and winter coats drying near heaters. A conductor in a dark navy uniform stepped down. He was in his 50s, with a lined, calm face and a cap dusted lightly with snowflakes. "Evening," he said, his voice low and unhurried. "Night train to Haldenfjord and beyond. You're boarding." "Yes," Lucas replied, lifting his small duffel bag. "To Haldenfjord." The conductor gave a short nod and stepped aside to let him up. "You're in car 3, second compartment on the left. Just follow the corridor. We won't be very crowded tonight." Lucas climbed the metal steps, feeling the difference immediately. The warmth inside enveloped him in a soft wave, his glasses fogging slightly as the cold air on them met the interior heat. He wiped them gently with his sleeve and moved into the corridor. The carriage was lined with polished wooden walls and a narrow hallway running along one side, the other side broken by large windows. Each compartment door had a small brass handle and a frosted number, with soft light leaking into the corridor from within. As he walked, the train began to move again. The gentle pull of motion, the faint hum beneath the floor, the soft creak of the car settling into its rhythm, it all blended into a sound that felt almost like breathing. Lucas reached his compartment and slid the door open. Inside was a compact, cozy space, a wide seat that would fold down into a bed, a small table beneath the window, and a reading lamp fixed near the corner. Above the seat, a luggage rack waited empty. The walls were a warm cream color with a thin trim of dark wood. The heater under the window hummed quietly, warming the glass as snow whispered against it from the outside. He set his bag on the seat, shrugged out of his coat, and hung it on the hook by the door. Then he sat down and let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside, the station lights glided slowly backward and disappeared behind a curtain of falling snow. The town slipped out of view, its houses and streets swallowed by dark and white, until all that remained were the pine trees, the hills, and the soft swirl of flakes. The train settled into a steady pace. The sound of the wheels on the rails became a repeating pattern, a muted clack, a low rolling hum, the occasional hollow echo as they passed over a small bridge. The entire carriage seemed to sway in a gentle, predictable rhythm. Lucas turned on the reading lamp. Its light was warm but not too bright, just enough to illuminate the small table and the seat. He placed his bag on the floor and moved to sit closer to the window, resting his shoulder against the padded wall. The snow outside made everything look slower. The trees blurred past, but their outlines were softened, their dark trunks streaked with white. Every now and then, he would catch sight of a frozen river, its surface dusted with snow, winding silently alongside the tracks before disappearing into more forest. He watched quietly, without thinking about anything too specific. The day's small worries and tasks felt distant now, somewhere back in the town, left behind on that platform. Here, inside the softly lit compartment, the world had narrowed to simple things: the warmth of the air, the rhythm of the train, the quiet of the snow. There was a light knock on the door. Lucas looked up. "Come in." The door slid open, and a woman in the same navy uniform as the conductor stepped in, holding a small tray with a metal teapot and a white ceramic cup. Steam curled gently from the spout. "Complimentary tea," she said with a small, friendly smile. "For the night passengers, helps keep the cold away." "Oh," Lucas said, pleasantly surprised. "Thank you, that's very kind. Would you like sugar?" "No, that's all right, just plain is fine." She poured the tea into the cup, the clear liquid darkening to a deep amber. The soft scent of black tea mixed with something slightly floral rose into the air. "If you need another pot later," she added, "I'll be at the end of the carriage for a while. There's a call button next to the light switch as well." He nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate it." She gave a gentle nod, then stepped back into the corridor, sliding the door closed behind her with a quiet click. Lucas lifted the cup in both hands, letting its warmth soak into his fingers. He took a small sip. The tea was smooth and comforting, just hot enough to chase away the chill that still lingered on his skin from the platform. He sat in silence for a while, alternating between watching the snow-covered world and savoring the warmth of the tea. Outside, the pine trees stood tall and patient, their branches heavy with fresh snow, their trunks dark against the pale ground. The sky had deepened fully into night now, a dark canvas above the forest. Inside, the carriage felt like a moving living room, floating gently through the winter landscape. Somewhere faintly, from the next carriage perhaps, he could hear the soft murmur of voices, other passengers talking quietly, or maybe just the conductor and attendant discussing schedules. The sounds were distant enough not to intrude, but close enough to be reassuring. He wasn't alone on this journey, even if his compartment was his own. He finished his tea, placed the empty cup back on the tray, and leaned his head against the cushioned wall. The train continued to move, unhurried, steady. At some point, he realized his eyes were closing more often than they were open. Not sleep yet, just that pleasant heaviness that comes from warmth and motion, and the knowledge that, for now, there is nothing he needs to do. He decided to get more comfortable. Lucas stood and unfolded the seat into a bed, the mechanism moving smoothly with a soft click. A neatly folded blanket and a flat pillow were tucked at the end. He spread the blanket out, feeling its soft weight, and placed the pillow near the window. He turned off the ceiling light, leaving only the reading lamp on. The compartment shifted instantly into a calmer, cozier atmosphere. Shadows softened along the walls. The glow from the lamp made a small circle of light around the bed, while the rest of the room faded into gentle dimness. He lay down on his side, facing the window, pulling the blanket over his shoulders. The heater beneath the window hummed steadily, warming the glass and the air around him. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The world beyond the window became a moving painting of white and gray and dark green, changing constantly, yet always somehow the same. Sometimes the train ran alongside a slope covered in snow-laden trees. Sometimes it crossed a small open field, where the wind nudged the snow sideways in fine, glittering lines. Sometimes the view narrowed into a close tunnel of pines on both sides, their branches bending lazily over the tracks. Lucas watched until the motion itself began to blur. The patterns of snow, the rhythm of passing trunks, the faint reflection of his own face in the glass, they all seemed to melt into the same quiet. His breathing slowed. The train rocked. The storm outside wrapped everything in its soft blanket of sound. He heard another distant horn, low and unhurried, echoing through the forest. It felt less like a warning and more like a gentle greeting to whatever small villages might be sleeping out there in the dark. Lucas closed his eyes. The last thing he was aware of was the feel of the blanket against his cheek and the sound of the wheels carrying him deeper into the winter night. Little by little, the thoughts that occasionally tried to form in his mind dissolved and drifted away. The day fell behind him completely. There was only the soft, steady motion of the snowbound express through the pines. And at last, Lucas slipped fully into sleep. Lucas didn't know how long he had been asleep when he half woke to the feeling of the train slowing down. It was a subtle shift, not a jolt. The soft, constant vibration under the mattress gentled, the rhythm of the wheels stretching apart, the hum of the engine lowering in pitch. He floated up just enough from sleep to notice it, his eyes still closed, his body still heavy and relaxed. The train was not stopping abruptly. It was more like a careful exhale, easing into a calmer breath. He opened his eyes slowly. The compartment was darker now. At some point, the reading lamp had switched itself off, either on a timer he hadn't known about or turned off by the attendant when she checked in. The only light came from outside, a faint, bluish glow slipping in around the edges of the curtains he had not fully drawn. Lucas rolled onto his back and listened. The hum of the heater continued its soft, comforting drone. The train creaked faintly as it settled into a slower speed. Somewhere beyond the door, he could hear the muted clink of metal on metal, a kettle or cups being moved, perhaps. Curious, but not in any hurry, he sat up and pushed the blanket aside. The air inside the compartment was still pleasantly warm, but cooler than before, as if the temperature outside had dropped even further. He moved to the window and gently pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the world was a deeper blue than it had been when he fell asleep. The snow glowed faintly in the early hours of the night, lit by the many layers of cloud above that bounced back the faint ambient light from faraway towns. The trees were blanketed in white, their branches heavy and still. The snowflakes were smaller now, falling in a fine, steady pattern that made the landscape look soft and slightly blurred. The train was moving through what looked like a wide valley. To the right, the silhouettes of mountains rose up, their upper slopes swallowed by low-hanging clouds. To the left, a frozen river ran alongside the tracks, its surface smooth and pale, dusted with fresh snow. The train's reflection slid across the ice in small patches where the snow was thin, the golden windows stretching out into long streaks of light that followed the carriages like a quiet echo. As he watched, the train slowed a little more, eventually reaching a steady, calm pace. They weren't stopping entirely, just taking this stretch of track more carefully, perhaps because of the snow. Lucas leaned his forehead lightly against the glass. It was cool, but not uncomfortable. His breath formed a small, temporary cloud on the surface before fading away. He didn't feel any urge to return to deep sleep just yet. This in-between state, half rested, half awake, felt peaceful. The kind of moment that didn't ask anything of him except to notice it. After a minute, there was a quiet, polite knock at his door. He turned and slid it open. The same female attendant from earlier stood there, this time with her cap slightly askew, a faint smile on her face. She held a small insulated pot and another cup. "Good evening again," she said softly. "Or perhaps good night. I noticed your light went out, but we're coming into one of the slower sections, and some people like a bit more tea if they wake up." "That sounds perfect," Lucas replied, stepping back to let her in. "Thank you." She entered and placed the pot and cup on the small table. "This one is herbal," she explained. "Chamomile and something the kitchen staff insists is their secret blend. No caffeine. Good for going back to sleep." He smiled at that. "You read my mind." "We've made this journey many times," she said gently. "After a while, you see the same patterns. People wake up when the train slows near the valley. The quiet makes them curious." She glanced briefly at the window, then back at him. "We'll be heading into the pines again soon. It gets very peaceful then. You can leave the curtains open if you like. Some people enjoy watching the snow drift past as they fall asleep again." "I think I might do that," he said, pouring some of the tea into the cup. "Do you ever get tired of this route?" She thought for a moment, her smile turning a little thoughtful. "I don't think so," she said. Out there, every night is different. The snow falls a little differently. The rivers freeze a little more or a little less. Inside, the days are similar, but in a way that's comforting. She shrugged lightly. It's like living inside a story that always moves at the same pace. That sounds nice, Lucas said quietly. It is, she replied. I hope you're finding it comfortable. Very. Good, she said, her eyes warm. If you need anything else, don't hesitate. With another gentle nod, she slipped back into the corridor, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Lucas lifted the cup and inhaled the soft, faintly sweet aroma of the herbal tea. It smelled like chamomile, a hint of mint, and something else he couldn't quite place, something floral and mild. He took a slow sip, feeling the warmth spread down his throat and into his chest. He returned to the bed and sat against the wall, pulling the blanket back over his legs. The window beside him framed the valley as it passed. Snow, trees, river, mountains, all washed in muted blues and silvers. Every so often, the train passed a small cluster of houses far in the distance, tiny squares of yellow light against the snow, like stars that had settled gently onto the ground. Smoke rose in thin lines from chimneys, barely visible in the dim night. He imagined the people inside those houses, sitting by their fires, perhaps drinking something warm, perhaps already asleep under thick quilts. The train's soft horn sounded once, low and distant, as if greeting them without expecting a reply. Lucas felt his shoulders unknot, his muscles released from some quiet tension he hadn't known he was carrying. The tea, the warmth, the sound of snow brushing the glass, they all worked together like pieces of a calming melody. The train entered another stretch of forest. The pines closed in around the tracks, standing tall and still as the snowbound express glided between them. Their trunks were dark and vertical, rising like quiet pillars into the night. Their branches held layers of snow that looked almost sculpted, rounded, and smooth. Snowflakes tapped lightly against the window, leaving tiny wet marks for just a moment before they melted and faded. The forest here had its own kind of silence. Lucas could feel it through the glass, the sense that if the train stopped, he'd be able to step out and hear nothing but the soft sound of snow landing on snow, the faint rustle of branches, and his own breathing. No traffic, no voices, no distant engines. Just winter resting. As he watched, the train passed a small wooden signal hut beside the tracks. A lamp glowed outside its door, casting a golden circle of light onto the snow. Someone had swept a narrow path from the hut to the tracks, though no footprints were visible now, already covered by the continuous snowfall. The hut slid out of sight behind them. The forest closed around the train once again. Lucas finished his tea, placed the cup back on the table, and lay down once more, this time on his back, turning his head so he could still see the window. He left the curtain open, letting the passing trees and falling snow remain in view. His breathing deepened. The rhythm of the wheels blended with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The heater hummed. The carriage creaked now and then, but never sharply, only in soft, familiar sounds, like an old house settling for the night. His eyes, following the movement beyond the window, began to close again. There was no rush to reach Haldenfjord. The train would arrive in its own time, after crossing valleys and rivers and miles of evergreen forest. For now, the journey was all that mattered, and even that didn't require anything from him other than to rest. His thoughts started to drift, no longer forming complete ideas. The train's soft motions turned to gentle waves beneath him. The snow outside blurred into an abstract wash of white and gray. The trees became long, vertical strokes of shadow. He felt as if he were floating slowly through a quiet sea of winter, the train his small, warm island. And once more, Lucas surrendered to sleep, carried through the forest by the snowbound express. When Lucas woke the next time, it was to a subtle change in light. The compartment had brightened slightly, not with the clear, sharp light of day, but with something softer, like the hint of dawn hidden behind clouds. He blinked and slowly pushed himself up onto an elbow, the blanket sliding down his arms. The window glowed with a pale, diffused light. He looked outside. The night was lifting, but gently. The sky had turned into a lighter shade of gray, still thick with clouds, but no longer the deep blue of full night. The snow reflected that faint brightness, making the world appear as if it had been painted in shades of quiet silver. The train was moving at a calm, steady pace. The forest still surrounded them, though here and there it opened into clearings, wide, empty fields where the snow lay untouched, smooth and unbroken. In the distance, low hills rose and fell like soft waves frozen in place. The snowfall had lightened. Only a few flakes drifted now, lazily spinning as they descended, as if they too were getting tired and ready to rest. Lucas checked his watch. According to the time, dawn was still a little way off, but they must have traveled many kilometers while he slept. He tried to piece together how many times he had drifted off and woken up, but it didn't really matter. The night had stretched behind him in a calm, uninterrupted line. He stood up slowly, stretching his arms overhead, feeling his back and shoulders loosen. The heater still cast a gentle warmth into the air. The blanket retained his body heat, a cozy nest on the bed. A faint murmur of activity floated in from the corridor now, soft footsteps, the muted clink of dishes. The train was waking up too, in its own quiet way. There was a small sink with a folding cover in the corner of the compartment. He opened it, splashed his face with cool water from the tap, and felt refreshed, more awake. The mirror above the sink showed a slightly rumpled man with sleep-tousled hair and soft creases on his cheek from the pillow, but his eyes looked calmer than they had the day before. He dried his face with the small towel provided, then turned as another gentle knock sounded at his door. "Come in," he said, stepping away from the sink. The door slid open, and the conductor himself, hat brushed off, uniform neat, appeared. His expression carried that steady, practiced calm of someone used to early mornings and late nights. "Good morning," the conductor said, though the sky still looked more like pre-morning. "Or close enough, at least. We'll be approaching a small stop in about half an hour. After that, it's mostly forest and lakes until Haldenfjord." "Good morning," Lucas replied. "Did I sleep through the night?" "Mostly," the conductor said with a hint of a smile. "That's usually a good sign. Means the train is doing its job. We'll have some light breakfast available in the dining car soon. If you'd like something to eat or just some stronger tea or coffee, you're welcome to join. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." "That sounds nice," Lucas said. "Thank you." "The dining car is just 2 carriages ahead," the conductor added. "Take your time. We won't be busy. Nights like this tend to keep people indoors." With that, he gave a small nod and moved on down the corridor, checking on the other compartments with the same quiet professionalism. Lucas considered the invitation for a moment. The thought of stretching his legs and sitting somewhere with a slightly different view sounded good. He pulled on his socks more firmly, slipped his feet into his shoes, and shrugged back into his sweater and jacket, leaving the coat on the hook for now. He opened the compartment door and stepped into the corridor. The hallway lights were dim but brighter than during the night, adjusted for the early hour. Through the windows along the side, he could see the snowy world gliding by, brighter now under the pale sky. A handful of other doors were open, revealing other passengers in various states of waking. One older man adjusting his scarf, another person tying their hair back, someone quietly sipping from a travel mug. The mood was calm. No one seemed rushed. Lucas walked through the carriage, feeling the train's motion under his feet. The floor panels creaked faintly in some places, but the sound was gentle, almost reassuring. This was a train with history. At the end of the carriage, he passed through the sliding doors into the next, then the next, until he reached the dining car. It had wide windows on both sides and a series of small tables with 2 cushioned seats facing each other at each one. The lights here were slightly brighter, but still warm. On the far end, a counter held a couple of large silver pots of coffee and tea, along with a tray of bread, butter, jam, and simple pastries. Only 3 other passengers were there. A woman reading a small book, a man staring quietly out the window with a cup of coffee in his hands, and a younger person wrapping their hands around a steaming mug, eyes half closed as if they were still halfway in their dreams. The attendant from the night before stood behind the counter, her uniform crisp, her hair pulled back. She glanced up and smiled when she saw him. "Good morning," she said. "Help yourself to whatever you like. We have coffee, tea, and some warm rolls coming out in a minute." "Morning," Lucas replied. "I'll start with tea again, I think, and maybe some bread." "Of course," she said, reaching for a cup. "Same herbal blend as during the night, or something stronger to wake up?" He thought for a moment, maybe a regular black tea this time. She nodded and poured from one of the pots into the cup, placing it on a small saucer and sliding it toward him. "Bread is just there," she said, nodding toward the tray. "There's some jam and honey as well." He constructed a simple breakfast: a warm roll, a bit of butter, a spoonful of berry jam, and carried his plate and cup to a table near the window. Outside, the train was running along the edge of a large frozen lake. Its surface stretched out in a wide plain of white, faintly textured by windswept snow. At the far side, the forest rose again, a dark line of trees standing like a quiet wall. He took a small bite of the roll, its warmth soothing and grounding. The tea was hot and pleasantly strong, waking him up just enough without cutting through the calm that the journey had woven around him. No one in the dining car spoke loudly. A few quiet words here and there, a soft chuckle, the clink of a spoon in a cup. Mostly, people seemed content to just sit and watch the passing landscape. Lucas let his mind drift. He thought about his destination, Haldenfjord, but only vaguely. He thought about the small apartment waiting for him there, about the to-do lists that would no doubt grow as soon as he arrived. But those thoughts felt like they belonged to a later chapter, one that hadn't started yet. For now, there was only this: the steady motion of the train, the snow outside, the warmth of tea between his hands. After finishing his breakfast, he lingered for a little while longer, just watching the world scroll past. The train eventually passed a tiny village, the kind that seemed just large enough to hold a few houses, a small grocery, and maybe a single, quiet cafe. Smoke rose from the chimneys, disappearing quickly into the cold air. A minute later, the village was gone, swallowed again by forest and snow. He didn't feel any impatience for arrival. The train could have continued like this for hours more, and he wouldn't have minded. Eventually, he stood slowly, returned his plate and cup to the counter, and thanked the attendant. "Sleep well?" she asked, drying a cup with a cloth. "Very well," he said. "I can see why people take night trains for the journey itself." She smiled. "They're good for that. Have a relaxing rest of the ride." He nodded and made his way back through the carriages to his compartment. When he stepped back inside, it felt almost like returning to a small, private nest. The bed was still unmade, the blanket slightly rumpled, holding the shape of where he had slept. The window still showed snowy fields and distant trees, now a bit brighter under the rising light. He folded the bed back into a seat, shook out the pillow and blanket, then sat down by the window, resting his arm along the sill. The snow-covered world continued to slide past. The night behind him felt long and full, yet somehow also light, like a deep breath taken slowly and released without effort. He knew the journey would end soon enough. But for these final stretches of track, he let himself simply be another passenger on the snowbound express, carried between winter pines, with nothing to do but watch the snow and listen to the steady song of the rails. The announcement came softly over the carriage speakers, spoken in a calm, steady voice that blended almost seamlessly with the quiet morning. Next stop, Haldenfjord Station. Arrival in approximately 20 minutes. Lucas heard it from his seat and felt a small shift inside him, not a jolt, just the gentle awareness that the journey was beginning to draw to a close. Outside the window, the forest had started to thin. The pines were still there, but now they alternated with smaller birch trees and open fields. Dark lines of fencing appeared occasionally, marking the edges of snow-covered pastures. In the distance, low roofs and tall chimneys hinted at the outskirts of the town. He watched as the landscape slowly took on more signs of human presence, not in a chaotic way, but in small, gradual details. A barn half buried in snow, a narrow road with fresh tire tracks, a lone figure walking along a path with a scarf pulled tightly around their face. The sky above remained cloudy, but the light had strengthened. It was a muted, gray morning, the kind that promised a quiet day rather than anything dramatic. Lucas stood and took his coat from the hook, slipping it on and buttoning it up to his chest. He checked his bag, still where he had left it, leaning against the base of the seat, and zipped it closed. There wasn't much inside: a change of clothes, a notebook, a few personal items. Somehow, it felt like enough. He sat again, deciding to spend the last few minutes of the journey just watching. The train passed over a wide steel bridge, and beneath it, a river flowed slowly between banks of ice and snow. Parts of it were frozen near the edges, but the center still moved, dark and smooth, carrying small chunks of ice downstream. The sound of the rails changed briefly over the bridge, humming with a slightly deeper tone, then returned to its normal rhythm once they reached the other side. The fields gave way to more frequent clusters of buildings, small houses with snow piled high on their roofs, smoke rising in soft curls from chimneys. Some windows glowed with warm yellow light, others reflected the pale sky. The train sounded its horn, not loud, but clear as it approached the town. Lucas felt the speed reduce. The motion beneath him smoothed into a gentler glide. The snowbound express, which had spent the night threading through remote forests and along frozen lakesides, was now easing into the approach of a destination. He took one last look at the passing scenery, committing the feel of it to memory. The slow drift of snowflakes still falling here and there, the soft blanket of white covering everything, the quiet lives beginning to stir behind windows and doors. Then he stood, slung his bag over his shoulder, and opened the compartment door. In the corridor, other passengers were doing the same, buttoning coats, collecting their belongings, adjusting scarves and hats. No one pushed or rushed. The mood remained calm, almost reverent, as if everyone understood that moving from the world of the train back into everyday life required a small, gentle transition. Lucas walked toward the end of the carriage, feeling the train gradually slow beneath his feet. Through the windows along the hallway, he saw the station come into view. A long platform lined with lamps, their bases half buried in snowbanks. A small station building with a steep, snow-covered roof. A few figures standing near the platform's edge, gathered in coats and hats. The train glided alongside the platform and came to a smooth stop. The familiar hiss of brakes sounded, followed by the soft clank of mechanisms settling into place. The doors opened with a quiet, practiced motion. Cold air drifted in, dusted with the faint scent of wood smoke and distant chimneys. Lucas stepped down onto the platform. The snow here was neatly cleared in a narrow path along the train, though piles of it rose on either side, packed and shaped by shovels. The sky overhead was a flat, pale gray, the kind that blended almost seamlessly with the white of the rooftops. He looked up the length of the train, seeing its line of blue carriages stretching back, their windows still glowing softly. For a moment, he imagined them continuing on without him, deeper into forests and valleys further north, carrying new passengers who would spend their own nights in quiet compartments, watching their own snow-covered worlds pass by. The conductor stepped out onto the platform near him, his breath forming faint clouds in the air. "Haldenfjord," he said, as if to confirm to anyone still unsure. "End of the line for this train." Lucas turned to him. "Thank you," he said, "for a very peaceful journey." The conductor's eyes crinkled with a small smile. "That's what it's meant to be," he replied. "I'm glad it served you well." The attendant came down behind him, carrying a small list on a clipboard, ticking boxes as she checked the train's status. She glanced up and spotted Lucas. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Yes," he said, feeling warmth in his voice. "Better than I have in a long time." "Good," she answered. Then the snow did its job too. She gestured toward the falling flakes, lighter now but still present. "Safe travels from here." "You too," he said. He adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder and began to walk slowly down the platform, his boots crunching softly in the thin layer of fresh snow that had settled since they arrived. Behind him, the snowbound express stood quietly, its engine humming at idle, a long, calm presence of metal and warmth against the cold morning. He turned once more before reaching the station building and looked back. For a brief moment, he didn't see schedules or timetables or the practical machinery of transportation. He saw instead a long, moving cocoon of calm, a place that had carried him gently through the heart of winter, rocked him to sleep, and given him a night where the world's usual noise had been replaced by the simple, steady rhythm of rails and snow. He took a deep breath of the cold air. The life waiting for him in Haldenfjord would pick up soon enough. There would be conversations, emails, errands, plans. But as he walked toward the exit of the station, he carried with him the quiet of the night train, tucked away like a small, warm ember in the back of his mind. Whenever he thought back to this journey, he knew what he would remember most clearly. The sound of snow brushing against the window, the gentle rocking of the carriage beneath him, the soft knock of the attendant bringing tea, and the sense that, for one long, peaceful night, all he had to do was rest while the snowbound express carried him safely through the winter pines. And somewhere, even now, as he stepped off the platform and into his new day, the train remained on the tracks behind him, still humming, still warm, still ready to slip once more into the snowy night and cradle another traveler in its steady, quiet rhythm. All right, cozy winter traveler, here comes a brand new snowy train sleep story. The soft chime of the station clock echoed through the cold evening air as the Northward Nightline asterisk settled quietly on the platform. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals, catching the warm glow of the yellow station lamps before melting on the frosted windows of the old wooden carriages. It was the kind of night where every breath hung suspended like a small cloud, and every sound felt muted by the heavy winter hush. Inside the station, Asteriskelia's Marin ***, a quiet man in his mid-30s with a charcoal scarf wrapped twice around his neck, pulled his leather satchel closer to his side. He had taken this train before once years ago, but circumstances were different now. Back then, he had been traveling for work, restless and hurried. This time, he traveled for something gentler, a pause asterisk, a winter retreat, a slow journey north where he could rest his thoughts to the rhythm of wheels on rails. The wooden doors of the train creaked open. A wave of warmth drifted out, carrying the scent of pine, old upholstery, faint vanilla, and something else, something that reminded him of winter cabins. The smell of soft wool drying, of worn books, of the lingering perfume of passengers from years long past. He stepped in. The interior lighting was low and golden, casting a soft honey-colored glow over the polished wooden walls. Deep green velvet seats lined each side of the carriage, and little brass hooks held blankets folded neatly for passengers. Snowflakes clung to the outside of the window beside Elia's, blurring into smudges of white as the heated air inside battled the cold creeping in from the glass. He settled into his seat by the window, setting his satchel at his feet. Outside, the station workers walked slowly up the platform, their boots crunching in the thick snow. A man in a long coat signaled with his lantern. In the distance, someone's laughter mixed with the echo of rolling luggage wheels. Then, like a sigh, the train began to hum. A soft vibration moved through the floor as the engine warmed up. Elias loosened his scarf, took a slow breath, and let his body sink deeper into the plush seat. A sense of peace washed over him, one he had not felt in months. Across the aisle, an elderly woman wrapped in a knitted shawl gave him a gentle nod. She had a smile like she knew secrets about winter that no one else did. "We're lucky tonight," she said softly. "Traveling in snowfall is always the calmest kind of journey." Elias smiled back. "Do you take this train often?" "Oh, whenever I can," she replied, settling a woolen blanket across her lap. "The world slows down on nights like this. And the Northward Line, well, it has a way of helping travelers find whatever they've misplaced in their hearts." He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply returned the nod. The whistle sounded, low, warm, almost sleepy. The platform began to drift backward. Snowflakes slid across the window like tiny dancers. The cozy night journey had begun. The city lights softened behind them until they were just faint glimmers swallowed by the falling snow. Soon, the train moved through open countryside where fields lay under thick blankets of white, only the tops of stone fences poking through here and there. The rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels created a pattern so steady and soothing that Elias felt tension leave his shoulders piece by piece. He watched the world slide by, shapes blurring into gentle shadows. A frozen pond reflecting the moon, a single farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney, rows of trees dusted in white powder. Inside, the golden lamplight flickered softly, as if swaying in time with the tracks. The attendant soon arrived, a tall man with kind eyes and a deep navy uniform that looked almost vintage. He carried a wooden tray holding small porcelain cups. "Good evening," he said quietly so as not to disturb sleeping passengers. "Warm chamomile, perfect for night travelers." Elias accepted a cup, feeling its warmth spread through his palms. The steam carried the scent of honey and dried blossoms. "Thank you." "Of course. It will help you rest," the attendant said with a smile before moving down the aisle, the soft asterisk click asterisk of his shoes barely audible over the train's gentle rumble. Elias took a sip. The taste was delicate and soothing, and the warmth spread down his throat and into his chest. He breathed out slowly and allowed his eyes to drift. The snow outside thickened. The windows fogged slightly at the edges, leaving only a soft oval of visibility where the passing fields looked like brushstrokes of white and silver. Occasionally, the wind would sweep across the glass with a faint shhh sound, like the world whispering. Minutes passed, maybe more. The rhythm of the journey was hypnotic. His thoughts wandered, not sharply, not intrusively, but like small feathers floating through his mind. He thought about the quiet lodge waiting for him at the end of the line. About mornings where he could sit by a fireplace, journaling in silence. About the last few months of busy routines and unspoken stress. All of that felt distant now, as though the train was pulling him not just through snow-covered landscapes, but gently away from all the noise he'd been carrying. The elderly woman across from him had already fallen asleep, her shawl rising and falling with each breath. A tiny knitted bird was attached to her bag, swinging softly with the movement of the carriage. Somewhere farther down the train, a violin hummed a slow, soothing melody. Someone must have been playing quietly to themselves, just gentle enough to echo faintly through the corridor. Each note blended with the sounds of the train until the music became a lullaby woven into the winter night. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Just one moment. The warmth of the train, the soft lights, the scent of chamomile, the weight of the blanket across his legs, all of it formed a cocoon of peaceful comfort. When he opened his eyes again, the train had entered a forest. Tall pine trees stood on either side, the branches heavy with fresh snow. The glow from the train windows illuminated the trunks in passing, creating fleeting scenes like pages from a winter picture book. A deer lifting its head, snow dust drifting like glitter, shadows stretching between the trees. He found himself leaning closer to the glass, watching the quiet world outside. It felt untouched, everlasting, a place where time moved slowly and kindly. He whispered without thinking, "Beautiful." The elderly woman stirred slightly and smiled without opening her eyes. "Told you," she murmured. After some time, Elias rose to stretch his legs. He walked through the softly lit corridor, passing compartments where passengers rested under blankets, some reading, some gazing out windows, others already deep in sleep. He reached the end of the carriage where a door with frosted glass led to the next. The faint scent of cinnamon drifted in from somewhere, perhaps the dining carriage. Curious and unhurried, he moved toward it. The dining car was mostly empty at this hour. The lamps were dimmer here, placed low along the wooden walls to create a soft amber glow. Curtains of deep burgundy were tied back, revealing windows where snow collected in gentle curves along the edges. A single passenger sat near the far end, a man with a large sketchbook, drawing the snowy scenery with charcoal. He nodded politely, but remained focused on his work. Elias took a seat by the window. The table was covered with a smooth white cloth, and an oil lantern flickered softly beside a small vase holding dried winter herbs. A young attendant approached. "Would you like something warm, sir? We have spiced cocoa and winter milk tea." Spiced cocoa would be perfect. As she prepared it behind the counter, Elias watched the snow whipping in airy flurries. The train slowed slightly as it curved along a frozen river shimmering faintly under the moonlight. His drink arrived steaming, topped with a light dusting of nutmeg. He cupped it between his hands and let the heat soak into him. Nothing in the world rushed here. No messages pinged. No deadlines pressed. It was just the hum of the engine, the snowy world outside, and a soft warmth inside wrapping around him like a blanket. He stayed there for a long time, sipping slowly, letting the winter night ease every bit of tension. Eventually, the attendant approached again. "We'll be passing Frostbridge Valley soon," she whispered. "The view is beautiful at night. Most passengers like to see it." "When we cross the bridge." She nodded. "Yes, it's quiet tonight, no wind. The snow makes everything glow." He thanked her and finished his cocoa. A soft bell chimed overhead. The train gently began to slow, and soon the dining car fell completely silent as the night line drifted toward the valley. Elias returned to his seat by the window, heart warm, body relaxed. The elderly woman was still asleep, her peaceful breathing mixing with the soft rumble of the tracks. Then, the forest opened, and the valley appeared. Snow-covered cliffs stretched above both sides of the river below, and the frozen water glowed faintly in the moonlight. The bridge itself seemed to float in the darkness. The entire landscape looked painted in silver and white, softened by the falling snow. The train moved silently across. Even the wheels seemed to hush themselves out of respect for the beauty of the moment. Elias found himself smiling without realizing it. He felt small in the best way, like a traveler moving through a gentle dream. He leaned back in his seat, let his eyes drift half-closed, and allowed the rhythm of the journey to wash over him. The snow fell thicker. The warmth wrapped around him tighter. His mind drifted softer. He breathed more deeply. And slowly, wonderfully, he felt sleep tug at him like a soft hand guiding him farther into calm. The warmth of the carriage wrapped around Elias like a cocoon as he drifted in and out of a light, peaceful doze. Each time he opened his eyes, the world outside had changed just slightly. Snowfall shifting in thickness, the moon shifting in angle, the soft glow of distant cottages blinking by like sleepy stars on the ground. The golden lamps overhead flickered gently as the train moved deeper into the northern countryside. The hum beneath his feet softened, the wheels whispering across smoother stretches of track. Someone somewhere softly turned a page of a book. A quiet yawn traveled down the carriage, barely audible. Every sound aboard the night line existed in harmony with the winter darkness around it. Elias pulled the provided wool blanket a little higher over his chest. It was surprisingly thick, woven with deep green and warm brown threads, smelling faintly of cedar and fresh laundry. He felt its comforting weight settle across him. The elderly woman across from him shifted in her sleep. Her shawl slid from one shoulder, and Elias gently reached forward and readjusted it so she wouldn't get cold. The movement didn't disturb her. She simply smiled softly as though caught in a pleasant dream. Elias leaned back again. He watched the snowfall thicken, and as minutes passed, slow, syrupy, peaceful minutes, his thoughts became gentler, quieter, softer. A light chime rang through the carriage. Elias blinked, lifting his head slightly. The overhead speaker crackled faintly to life, but the voice that emerged was low, soothing, more like a bedtime storyteller than a conductor. "Good evening, dear passengers," the voice said. "We will now enter the *Whitewood Corridor*, a long and gently winding stretch of winter forest. Lights will be dimmed slightly for your comfort. Should you need anything, our attendants are here for you. Please rest well." The announcement ended with a tiny crackle. Then the lights softened further, becoming warm embers rather than bright lanterns. The glow reflected in the windows, blending with the snowy darkness until everything felt like one calm, breathing space. The forest outside grew denser. Tall birch trees stood like pale guardians on both sides of the tracks, their white trunks gleaming faintly. Snow blanketed each branch, creating shadows that drifted and danced as the train passed. Elias found the rhythm of the movement hypnotic, like waves rolling in slow motion. His eyes traced the patterns in the snow, the uneven mounds, the hollow dips, the faint trails of small animals crossing between trees. He could imagine foxes curled under burrows, owls perched silently above, all watching as the gentle old train passed through their realm. He imagined them listening to the low hum, unsure what kind of creature it was, deciding it wasn't a threat but simply a wandering giant sliding through the forest on polished rails. The thought made him smile faintly. He wasn't usually one for whimsical ideas, but something about the night line brought that out in him. The train had a personality, a quiet kindness, a warmth that felt almost alive. The door at the end of the carriage slid open with a gentle hiss. The attendant from earlier, the one who had offered chamomile, approached with a new tray, this one carrying little clay cups emitting steam. "Good evening again," he whispered softly. "For those awake, we've prepared winter apple infusion ***, spiced, warm, and meant to help you sleep. Would you like one?" Elias accepted with a nod. "Yes, thank you." The attendant poured from a small copper kettle into a clay cup, and the scent immediately reached Elias: warm apple, cinnamon, a hint of clove, and something floral beneath it. The attendant smiled. "This is a nightline tradition. My grandmother used to make it for me." "It smells wonderful." "It helps the heart settle," he said, tapping the side of the kettle before moving on. Elias cupped the warm clay between his hands. It radiated heat in a soothing way, as if meant not just for drinking, but for holding, grounding oneself. He took a sip. The flavor was mild, delicate, lightly sweet, and incredibly comforting, like warm apples baked under a blanket of spice, like childhood winters, like something you didn't know you missed until the moment you tasted it again. He closed his eyes and let the warmth move through him. The snowfall outside thickened, swirling in gentle waves that drifted across the windows. The world beyond became softer, blurrier, quieter. The elderly woman awoke just enough to wrap her fingers around a cup offered to her. She inhaled deeply, smiled without opening her eyes, and returned to half-sleep with the cup resting between her palms. Elias mirrored her posture. He let the scent of the infusion mingle with the soft warmth of the lamplight. And as the train moved deeper into Whitewood Corridor, sleep tugged at him again, not abrupt, not heavy, but slowly, like a tide drawing him toward a shore of rest. At some moment, minutes or perhaps an hour later, the train gently slowed. Elias stirred just enough to glance outside. They had entered a vast open stretch of land. Snow-covered meadows unfurled in every direction, uninterrupted except for the occasional frost-tipped bush. The moon hung low, casting a silver-blue blanket across the landscape. The snowfall became fine, almost like dust, shimmering in the reflected moonlight. In the distance, lights flickered. A tiny village appeared, its rooftops nearly hidden under layers of snow, its chimneys releasing faint curls of smoke. Each house glowed warmly, windows radiating golden light into the cold night. As they passed, Elias could imagine the lives inside. Families gathered near fireplaces, old radios humming low music, children already asleep under heavy quilts. The night line continued on. The village faded behind them. The world grew quiet again. A little while later, Elias rose and walked toward the observation lounge at the back of the train, a place he remembered from years ago, though only faintly. At night, it was usually empty, and passengers were welcome to sit in calm silence while watching the world retreat behind them. He reached the lounge. Inside, a semicircular window stretched nearly floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the snowy tracks unfurling into the darkness. The room was dim, lit only by two small lanterns placed low along the wooden walls. Cushioned benches curved gently around the glass. A faint scent of pine and winter air filled the space. Elias sat. He wasn't alone. There was one other passenger, a young woman with a thick notebook, her hair tied loosely with a ribbon. She smiled briefly before returning to her writing, her pen moving in slow, thoughtful lines. Elias glanced out the window. The snow behind them appeared almost luminous, glowing as the train lights cast warmth onto the white landscape. The flakes danced in the air before settling into the long, endless trail left by the tracks. He watched for a long time. The snow, the fading trail, the horizon rising and falling with gentle hills. Nothing demanded his attention. Nothing pulled him forward or backward. His breathing slowed. His shoulders softened. He felt, for the first time in what felt like a year, truly rested. As the train curved across another wide field, the young woman beside him closed her notebook and said quietly, "It's peaceful, isn't it?" Elias nodded, more than I expected. Night trains always are. It feels like the world is asleep, but you get to stay awake just long enough to see it's dreaming. That's a nice way to put it. She smiled faintly. I travel often. I write stories about places where time moves gently. This train is one of my favorites. Elias hesitated. Do you feel like it's different from other trains? Absolutely, she said without pause. Most trains take you somewhere. This one takes you away from things. Elias felt those words settle into him. She didn't elaborate, and she didn't need to. They returned to quiet, both watching the soft snowfall erase the world behind them. Eventually, Elias returned to his seat. The elderly woman was awake now, sipping the last of her apple infusion. "Isn't this a lovely journey?" she whispered. "It really is," Elias replied. "I always tell people," she said, leaning slightly closer, "that the night line brings out the best kind of calm. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you. It just lets you be." Elias nodded. She continued, "And when you arrive, wherever that may be, you feel as though you've been gently unwound." He took in her words, storing them somewhere deep inside where truth often settles. Outside, the snow became thick again, drifting in patterns that looked almost like they're moving to the rhythm of the tracks. Inside, the warmth remained steady. The lights stayed low. Someone coughed softly in the distance. A blanket was adjusted. A cup settled onto a wooden holder with a muted clink. Every tiny sound added to the tapestry of comfort. Hours passed, not rushing, not dragging, just flowing like a slow winter river. The train occasionally crossed bridges, each with its own echoing tone. Sometimes the wind brushed against the windows with a gentle sigh. Sometimes the snow became heavier, then lighter, then heavier again. Every shift outside only deepened the stillness inside. Elias found himself drifting once more, not quite asleep, not quite awake, but floating. He saw the reflection of his own face faint in the window, framed by fog edges. His breath made a soft patch of cloud on the glass. He traced a small circle in it with his fingertip, watched it vanish. He felt weightless. Thoughts came and went like slow-moving clouds. Memories softened. Worries faded. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the rails. And then, somewhere deeper in the night, the conductor's voice returned, this time even softer. "Dear passengers, we are now approaching the *Snowville Highlands*, the quietest stretch of our entire journey. Many travelers rest deeply here. Please enjoy the peaceful silence." The lights dimmed further, becoming little more than warm twinkles. The hum of the engine softened until it was barely audible. Snowville Highlands was known for its thick, powdery snow that muffled sound like a blanket. As the train entered the region, even the wheels' rhythm became muted. It felt almost as though the train was gliding over clouds. Elias closed his eyes again. The silence was almost magical, not empty, but full of softness. Each breath felt slower. Each heartbeat felt calmer. The train carried him deeper, and deeper, and deeper still. By the time the first pale hints of dawn crept into the sky, Elias had slept deeply and dreamlessly. He opened his eyes to find the snow still falling, much lighter now, like drifting feathers illuminated by early morning light. The lamps brightened slightly as the train adjusted to morning mode. The elderly woman stretched her arms and smiled. "Rest well." Elias nodded. "Very well." "That is the gift of winter journeys," she said. Outside, the world was now brushed with soft pink hues from the rising sun. Snow-covered hills glowed in pastel colors. Thin layers of mist curled above frozen lakes. Trees stood in quiet rows, their branches sparkling faintly. The train slowed as it approached a small wooden station nestled between two hills. A sign came into view. "Pine Hollow, final stop of the night line." Elias breathed in. He wasn't disappointed the journey was ending. He felt full, rested, unburdened. The train glided into the station and exhaled one last warm breath of steam into the cold morning air. Passengers gathered their belongings, moving slowly, peacefully, as though still half in dream. Elias stood, wrapping his scarf around his neck again, feeling the weight of his satchel return to his shoulder. But it didn't feel heavy, not like before. He stepped off the train onto the wooden platform dusted with fresh snow. The crisp air greeted him gently. The elderly woman passed by him and touched his arm lightly. "May whatever you came here to find greet you with kindness," she said. He nodded with a grateful smile. "Thank you for everything." She waved and walked toward the snowy path leading out of the station. Elias inhaled the cold, fresh morning air. The night line whistled softly behind him. Snowflakes melted on his coat, and as he began walking toward the quiet lodge that awaited him, he felt, truly, deeply, that something inside him had settled into a peaceful stillness he had needed for far too long. A stillness gifted by a warm train, a snowy night, a slow journey north, and the gentle hush of winter itself. Story 2, The Midnight Mountain Line. The station at Oldridge was almost silent when the Midnight Mountain Line slid into view, its windows glowing softly against the deep winter night. Snow had been falling steadily for hours, layering every surface with a thick, gentle blanket. Rooftops, station lamps, benches, even the overhead sign that read Platform 3, northbound mountain line, departure 23:45. The air outside was cold enough that each breath turned into a small white cloud, hovering for a moment before dissolving into the darkness. The platform lights bathed the falling snow in a warm yellow glow, making each flake look almost golden as it drifted lazily downward. Lena Hart, wrapped in a thick navy coat and a knitted scarf her grandmother had made years ago, stood near the middle of the platform. Her suitcase rested by her boots, already dusted with a fine layer of snow. She watched as the train eased to a stop, the brakes releasing a soft sigh of steam that curled upward like a long exhale. She had booked this journey weeks ago, craving something she couldn't quite name, a pause, a deep breath, a stretch of uninterrupted quiet. Her destination was a small mountain town called Frostmere, where a lakeside inn with a stone fireplace and wooden beams waited for her. But the journey itself, this overnight ride up through the mountains, through snow and stillness, was what had called to her most. The train doors opened with a low hiss. Warmth spilled out at once. Muted lamplight, polished wood, the faint scent of tea, wool, and something cinnamon-like. The contrast with the cold platform felt like stepping from a dream of winter into the heart of a cozy cabin. A conductor in a dark coat and a patterned wool vest stepped out, his cap dusted lightly with snow. He gave a small, courteous bow to the waiting passengers. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "Welcome aboard the Midnight Mountain Line. Tickets, please, as you come in. Your compartments are prepared. Take your time, this train is in no rush tonight." Lena liked how he said it, no rush. That was the whole point. She handed him her ticket. "Compartment D7, he said. "Left side, mountain view. You're in for a beautiful ride." "Even at night?" she asked. "Especially at night," he replied. "The snow does interesting things to the moonlight up there." She stepped onto the train. The warm air loosened the cold from her skin. The narrow corridor stretched ahead, lined with wooden panels and frosted glass doors to private compartments. Small brass lamps cast a soft amber glow across the carpet. Lena found D7, the door slightly ajar as if waiting for her. The compartment was small but wonderfully cozy. 2 plush seats facing each other, a fold-down upper bunk, a wooden shelf, and a neat little table under a wide window. 2 folded wool blankets, one dark green, one deep red, rested in the corner. Above the window, a heavy curtain was tied back, revealing snow drifting through the night outside. She sat by the window. More passengers boarded. A family with 2 sleepy children, a man with a long coat and a briefcase, an older couple sharing a scarf. They filtered into various compartments, their reflections passing across her window before disappearing behind doors. Slowly, the platform emptied. "Midnight Mountain Line to Frostmere and beyond, last call," the conductor announced softly from outside. The train began to move not with a jolt, but a feeling, a gentle hum rising under her feet. The platform drifted backward, lamps sliding past the window. Snowflakes now angled sideways as the train picked up speed, the station lights fading behind a curtain of white. Inside, the train settled into a hush. The rhythmic clack of the wheels formed a soothing heartbeat beneath everything. Lena leaned her forehead against the cool window and watched the world dissolve into snowy countryside. A light knock came at her door. An attendant with curly hair and a warm smile peeked in. "Good evening. I'm Tomas, attending this carriage tonight. Would you like something warm to drink? Vanilla chamomile tea or spiced winter milk?" "The chamomile," she said. He nodded. "I'll bring it right away. And if you need extra blankets or pillows, there's a brass bell by the door." A few minutes later, Tomas returned with a small wooden tray. On it sat a delicate cup of steaming tea and a little dish with a honey cube. The tea smelled like comfort itself, chamomile, vanilla, a hint of something floral. The snowfall outside intensified. The flakes grew larger, drifting in luminous waves across the window. The forests and fields turned to softened shadows under the drifting white. After some time, Lena wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stepped out to stretch her legs. The corridor was dim and quiet. At the end of the carriage, a frosted glass door led to the lounge. Inside, the lounge was softly lit, with curved windows offering a wider view of the night. A few cushioned chairs sat near shelves of old books. Only 3 passengers were there, an older man reading a thick novel and a quiet couple holding hands while watching the snow. Lena poured a half cup of herbal tea from a pot labeled Nighttime Blend and took a seat by the window. The train was climbing now. The engine's hum deepened as the land rose and fell in snowy hills. Dark pine forests drifted by, branches heavy with snow that occasionally fell in small cascades as the train passed. She found a slim book of winter poems on the shelves. The pages were yellowed, corners softened. She read a few lines, the rhythm of the train beneath her forming a gentle lullaby. Her eyes grew heavy, and she closed the book. When she returned to her compartment, the world outside had transformed again. The train was crossing a high mountain pass. One side was a rock wall glittering with icicles, the other opened into a vast, snowy valley glowing under moonlight. The frozen river below shimmered faintly. Villages dotted the slopes in the distance, their windows glowing warmly through the cold. A small card on her table read, "Dear passenger, as we cross the high pass, many travelers find deep rest. Feel free to convert your seats into a bed at any time. Sleep well among the mountains." She smiled and unfolded the seats into a bed. Wrapped in the wool blankets with her head on the lavender-scented pillow, she lay facing the window. The moonlit valley watched her back while the train rocked gently. Her thoughts softened, drifting like snowflakes. Soon she was asleep, the midnight mountain line carrying her deeper through the mountains. Hours passed quietly. Snow fell in finer flakes now, like powdered sugar. Pines stood like silent guardians along the tracks. Most passengers slept. Attendants walked lightly, adjusting small details, picking up empty cups, checking doors. The train entered a tunnel at one point, the sound echoing softly, then emerged again into a sky filled with bright stars. Near dawn, a soft powdery blue touched the horizon. Lamps in the compartments glowed faintly warmer. The scent of coffee drifted through the air. Lena woke slowly, feeling lighter than she had in months. She sat up and looked out. The train moved through a wide valley where the mountains glowed pink and gold under the rising sun. Trees sparkled with frost. A frozen lake appeared, smooth and pale, and at its edge sat the town of Frostmere. Tiny houses with steep roofs clustered by the water. Smoke curled from chimneys. Warm lights glowed in windows. This was what she'd imagined. A gentle knock came. Tomas entered with a tray holding a little teapot and a warm, sweet roll. "We'll reach Frostmere in about 20 minutes, he said softly. "Thought you might like some breakfast." She thanked him and ate slowly as the train approached the town. The details became clearer. A bakery with a hanging sign, a small square with a snow-covered fountain, a stone church tower marking the hour. The train slowed. The wheels hummed lower. Frostmere Mountain Lake Station passed into view. The midnight mountain line eased to a stop with a soft sigh. Lena dressed and gathered her things. Other passengers emerged, gentle and unhurried. At the exit, the conductor and Tomas wished her well. She stepped onto the snowy platform. The air was cold but fresh. She looked back at the train, its windows glowing warmly. Steam drifted upward in soft curls. A bell chimed. The train replied with a low whistle, as if saying goodbye. Slowly, it began to move again, continuing toward other mountain towns and other quiet nights. Lena stood watching until it disappeared around a bend. Then she turned toward the path leading into Frostmere, feeling calm, rested, and unhurried. The memory of wheels on tracks and moonlit mountains lingered inside her like a soft warmth. Somewhere out in the snowy mountains, she knew, the midnight mountain line continued its quiet journey each night, carrying tired hearts toward rest. Winter Rail to Silverbridge Asterisk. Snow drifted across the abandoned platform of North Pine Station in slow, unhurried spirals, as though even the wind felt sleepy tonight. The lanterns along the platform glowed with a muted amber light, softened by layers of frost that had gathered over the day. A single bench sat empty beneath the awning, dusted with a thin layer of settling snow. The sign overhead creaked faintly in the cold. Northbound Limited, departing 22:10. Mara Benton stood near the edge of the platform with her gloved hands wrapped around the handle of her suitcase. She had arrived early, far earlier than necessary, but she wanted to breathe the cold air, watch the snow fall, and let her mind settle before boarding. It was her first proper holiday in years, her first chance to disconnect from schedules and deadlines. She was headed to Silverbridge, a quiet winter town tucked along a winding river, reachable only by a long, leisurely rail route that passed through forests, mountains, frozen lakes, and wide stretches of untouched landscape. She had chosen it specifically because it was peaceful, the kind of peaceful that felt earned by the land itself. The rails trembled gently under her boots. She lifted her eyes toward the dark horizon. A glow began to appear in the distance, golden, warm, moving steadily toward the station. The faint hum of an engine rolled through the cold air. Snowflakes illuminated themselves in the approaching light, dancing like tiny sparks. Then the great shape of the train emerged, long and elegant, its windows glowing softly from within. The paint along the side was a deep forest green, trimmed with brass that glimmered even in the dim station lights. The Silverbridge Night Limited. It slowed with a mindful grace, the wheels whispering against the rails. A plume of steam curled around the engine and spiraled upward like a ghost stretching after a long rest. When the train finally came to a stop, the door of the first passenger car opened with a subtle hiss, releasing a wave of warm air that smelled faintly of pine wood, old books, and freshly brewed tea. A conductor stepped out, an older man with silver hair tucked neatly beneath his cap. His uniform coat was thick, tailored, and dusted lightly with snow. He looked as though he belonged to another era, one where time moved slower and trains were built for journeys, not speed. He offered Mara a kind smile. "Good evening. Ticket, please." She handed it to him, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Compartment B4, he said, stamping the ticket with a practiced, gentle motion. "Left side. Lovely views tonight. Snowfall like this makes the world glow." She nodded, grateful already for the quiet warmth he carried in his voice. As she stepped onto the train, the cold slipped away behind her. The corridor was lit with brass wall lamps casting soft pools of golden light. A thick runner carpet muffled her footsteps. The walls were paneled in warm, polished wood. Everything felt welcoming, familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. She walked down the corridor until she found her compartment. The door opened smoothly, revealing a cozy space. 2 seats upholstered in deep blue velvet, a fold-down bunk above, a polished table under a wide window, and 2 neatly folded blankets, one cream, one burgundy, resting in a small woven basket. A silver kettle sat on a tray in the corner, accompanied by 2 porcelain cups and a small container of tea leaves. Her suitcase thumped softly onto the seat as she set it down. She unwrapped her scarf slowly, letting her shoulders relax for the first time that day. From outside, the conductor's voice called, "Final boarding. Night Limited to Silverbridge departing in 2 minutes." The door to her compartment closed with a soft, satisfying click. Mara sat by the window and watched as the last few passengers trickled aboard. A young couple wrapped together in a single coat. A solitary man carrying a sketchbook beneath his arm. An elderly woman with a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. Then, with a gentle pull, the train began to move. The platform slid backward. The lamps drifted away into the snowy darkness. The world beyond the window shifted from station lights to open fields blanketed in fresh snow. The Night Limited hummed beneath her, steady and soft. The journey had begun. The town lights faded within minutes, swallowed by the snowy countryside. The sky was dark but not empty. Clouds drifted in slow waves, occasionally revealing faint stars. Snowflakes kissed the window, melting instantly into tiny rivulets. Mara leaned back into her seat, letting the rhythmic sway of the train settle her breathing. With each passing moment, the landscape grew quieter, softer, more dreamlike. A knock sounded on her door. She turned as it slid open. An attendant stood there, a woman in her 20s with warm brown eyes and an apron embroidered with small pine branches. She held a tray with a teapot and a small plate of shortbread. "Complimentary evening tea," the attendant said with a gentle smile. "Peppermint and elderflower. Helps travelers unwind." "That sounds perfect," Mara said. The attendant poured a small cup, the steam curling upward sweetly. Mara could smell it even before taking a sip. Cool mint, floral warmth, something soothing beneath it all. "When you're ready for bed," the attendant added, "the seat folds down easily. If you need help, just ring the bell by the door. And if you have trouble sleeping, the lounge car stays open all night." "Thank you." The door slid closed. Mara held the cup with both hands, feeling its warmth spread through her fingers. The tea tasted delicate and calming, like something a kind grandmother would brew during a winter storm. Outside the window, the train began to enter a forest. Tall pines lined the track, their branches heavy with snow. The lights from the train illuminated them in fleeting glimpses as they passed, glints of white, shadows stretching across the ground, occasional bursts of snow shaking free from the upper branches. The forest seemed to breathe as the train moved through it. A deep quietness settled over the world. Minutes passed, then longer stretches that felt more like soft pools of time rather than numbers. The rhythmic hum of the rails blended with the snowy darkness until the two felt inseparable. Mara's eyelids grew heavy. She finished her tea, set the empty cup on the table, and stood to stretch her legs. The corridor outside was dimly lit, the lamps lowered to a soft glow for nighttime travel. She walked slowly toward the lounge car, guided by the faint sound of a crackling fireplace. The lounge was nearly empty. A faux fireplace flickered soft amber light across the floor, its warmth gentle and steady. Plush chairs and low tables filled the space, many draped with soft throws. One corner held a shelf of books, mostly old, their spines cracked with use. Only one passenger sat here now, an elderly man with a neatly trimmed beard reading a thin novel. He looked up as Mara entered and offered a small nod before returning to his book. Mara chose a seat near the window. The lounge windows were larger than those in the compartments, offering a sweeping view of the night forest sliding by. Snow shimmered faintly in the train's reflected light. The trees formed dark silhouettes against the white ground, their branches bowing gently. She watched them pass, feeling the weight of the day slowly dissolve. The train left the forest behind after some time, opening into a wide, snow-covered plain. In the distance, faint lights appeared, perhaps a farmstead or a tiny settlement. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney. A barn roof sagged slightly beneath a heavy drift of snow. A single lantern hung from a fence post, swaying faintly. The night limited rolled on, slowly, peacefully. Mara's breath matched the movement of the train. She eventually returned to her compartment feeling warm and unburdened. She folded the seats into a bed, tucked herself under the blankets, and lay facing the window. The world outside was a ribbon of silver and shadow. The snow fell in thick, feathery waves. Her thoughts softened. Her breathing slowed. She drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Hours passed gently. The train moved through valleys, across bridges, and through tunnels. It climbed steadily toward the mountains that shielded the route to Silverbridge. Snow thickened. The wind softened. The world grew quieter still. Just before dawn, the first pale light touched the sky. The train emerged from a long tunnel into a high mountain pass. The valley below was vast and white, untouched by anything except moonlight and drifting snow. The peaks in the distance glowed faintly pink as the sun prepared to rise. Mara stirred, waking slowly. The compartment was filled with a soft, bluish glow from the window. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and looked outside. Her breath caught. The view was breathtaking. Jagged mountains rose like sleeping giants, their slopes covered in thick, glittering snow. A frozen river wound through the valley far below, reflecting the emerging dawn in soft hues of rose and lavender. Pine forests hugged the lower slopes, their branches shimmering under frost. She pressed her hand to the window, absorbing the quiet beauty of the scene. A knock sounded. Tomas, the conductor from the night before, slid the door open a few inches. He held a tray with warm bread, butter, and a steaming cup of morning tea. "Good morning," he said softly. "We'll reach Silverbridge soon. Thought you might like breakfast before we arrive." She thanked him and took the tray. The bread was warm enough that steam escaped when she tore off the first bite. The tea tasted bright with a hint of citrus. As she ate, the train descended gradually from the pass. The river curved wider. The pine forests opened into a broad valley dotted with homes and small farms. Then she saw it. Silverbridge. The town nestled along the bend of the river, its buildings painted in soft winter colors, deep blues, creamy whites, gentle grays. A tall stone bridge arched over the water, frosted at the edges. Warm lights glowed from windows and lanterns. Smoke drifted peacefully from chimneys. The train slowed with a gentle sigh. Myra stood, wrapped her scarf around her neck, and gathered her things. The brakes hummed lightly, and the Silverbridge station came into view, small, charming, built of stone and wood. When the train stopped, the doors opened with a breath of warm air. Myra stepped out into the crisp morning cold. The snow beneath her boots crunched softly. The air smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke. She turned back toward the train one last time. The Night Limited sat steaming gently, its windows glowing softly even in the daylight. The conductor tipped his hat as he passed. Myra smiled, feeling a warmth settle deep inside her. She began walking toward the town, her suitcase trailing behind her. The path was lined with lanterns still glowing from the night. The river shimmered under the gentle morning sun, and behind her, the train released a low whistle, a final, peaceful farewell. The train's farewell whistle lingered in the cold morning air as Myra took her first few steps towards Silverbridge. The snow-covered path from the station wound gently downhill, flanked on both sides by tall lampposts whose glass globes still glowed with the last traces of dawn light. The snow beneath her boots packed softly, creating a slow, comforting rhythm as she walked. Each breath she drew tasted crisp, clean, touched with the faint scent of wood smoke drifting from distant chimneys. Silverbridge revealed itself gradually, as though the town preferred to introduce its charms one small piece at a time. The first thing Myra noticed was the river. It curled gracefully through the valley, wide and shimmering beneath a thin layer of early morning frost. Patches of open water caught the pale sunlight, reflecting soft golden streaks that rippled with the slow movement of the current beneath the ice. Ducks huddled near the shore, tucked beneath the overhangs of snow-dusted branches. She paused to take it all in. After years of living her life in short bursts and longer obligations, this place felt like an exhale she had long forgotten how to release. The town's houses were built in gentle, welcoming shapes, steep roofs to carry away heavy snow, wide windows framed with wooden shutters painted in soft blues and faded greens. Some windowsills held small pots of winter flowers, their petals dusted with frost, yet still offering subtle color to the cold landscape. Every door seemed to have a wreath of pine or dried berries, each one a quiet sign of someone who cared enough to make things beautiful. Myra crossed the stone bridge that arched over the river. It was older than the town itself, according to the guide she had read, built by wandering stonemasons long before railroads or carriages ever reached these mountains. Ice had formed along the edges, dangling in small crystal spears that glinted when the light struck them. Beneath the arch, the river murmured, the sound both muted and deep. On the other side of the bridge, she found the town square. It was small, almost quaint, but in the most comforting way imaginable. A circular fountain sat at its center, its tiers coated in thick frost and snow, transforming the sculpture into an ice-carved monument. Clusters of wooden benches lined the edges, their surfaces dusted with fresh powder. Shops bordered the square, bakeries, a small general store, a bookshop with a display of journals and novels arranged neatly in the window. And there, at the far edge, stood her destination, the Hearthlight Inn. The inn was larger than she expected, but not imposing. Built of pale gray stone with warm wooden beams, it looked like a place designed to hold winter rather than fight it. Smoke curled gently from two chimneys. The windows emitted a warm gold light that shimmered through the icy air. Icicles hung from the eaves, glowing in the sun like small glass ornaments. Myra approached the front door and pushed it open. Warmth enveloped her immediately. The air smelled of pine logs, citrus peel, and something baking cinnamon perhaps or nutmeg. A spacious lobby stretched before her, with a large stone fireplace crackling merrily on the far wall. Plush chairs circled the hearth, and a long wooden counter stood to the right, adorned with small pine cones, lanterns, and a vase of winter berries. A woman stepped out from a back room. She appeared to be in her 40s, with warm brown hair pulled into a gentle twist and a pair of glasses perched on her nose. Her sweater was a soft cream color and looked handmade, adding to the inn's comfortable atmosphere. "Welcome," she said with a smile that felt genuine and unhurried. "You must be Mara Benton. We've been expecting you." Mara blinked in surprise. "You have?" The woman laughed lightly. "Well, not personally, but we received your booking last week, and the morning limited hasn't arrived yet, so you must be one of the few from the night limited. It's always a pleasure to see travelers arriving early, means you get to enjoy the quiet hours." She retrieved a brass key from a drawer. Attached to it was a small wooden tag carved with the number 12. "Your room is upstairs," she said. "Second door on the left. Breakfast is served until 10, but you're welcome to grab tea or pastries at any time. Make yourself at home." Myra accepted the key, feeling the smooth, worn wood under her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman offered another warm smile. "Rest, breathe, and enjoy Silverbridge. The town has a way of slowing people down." Upstairs, room 12 was cozy and bright. A large window overlooked the river and the snowy roofs below. A quilted bedspread in shades of deep red and cream invited her to sink into it. A small table by the window held a kettle, 2 mugs, and a tin of herbal tea. A sitting chair, upholstered in dark blue, stood beside a bookshelf stocked with novels and local history guides. Myra set her suitcase down and sat on the bed. The springs were soft without being too deep, and the quilt felt heavy in a comforting way. She breathed in slowly. For the first time in years, she felt she had arrived somewhere that asked absolutely nothing of her. She unpacked slowly, folding her clothes into the small wardrobe and placing her toiletries in the bathroom. Every motion felt easier than usual, as though Silverbridge itself whispered reminders to move softly, take her time, allow herself to unwind. After settling in, she returned downstairs to explore the inn. The common room had grown livelier. A few guests sat near the fire reading books, cups of steaming tea held in their hands. A middle-aged couple played a quiet board game, laughing now and then. 2 children sat on a rug, drawing in notebooks while their parents chatted softly nearby. Mara found a spot near the fireplace. Its warmth seeped into her bones, melting away the last remnants of travel fatigue. She closed her eyes for a moment, simply listening to the crackle of the logs and the murmured conversations around her. But eventually, her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten much since the night before, so she made her way to the dining area. A warm, fragrant buffet awaited guests: fresh bread, porridge sweetened with honey, baked apples sprinkled with cinnamon, slices of cheese, and small carafes of berry compote. Mara filled a plate and found a table near the window. As she ate, she watched the town slowly come to life. A man cleared snow from the bakery entrance. A woman carrying parcels crossed the square. A pair of dogs trotted by, leaving small, eager footprints in the snow. Smoke rose gently from chimneys across the valley. The river shimmered faintly as sunlight touched its surface. Silverbridge felt like a painting, each detail intentional, each moment calm. After breakfast, she wandered outside again. The cold brushed gently against her cheeks, but she found it refreshing rather than sharp. She followed a small path along the riverbank, listening to the soft sounds of running water beneath thin layers of ice. A wooden footbridge arched over the river farther down the path. She crossed it, pausing at the center to look out over the valley. The mountains surrounded Silverbridge like quiet sentinels, their peaks still glowing with the remnants of sunrise. Snow-draped pine forests stretched across the slopes. Every now and then, a gust of wind stirred loose powder from the branches, sending it cascading in tiny silver storms. Myra felt something inside her finally settle, a stillness she didn't know she had been searching for. A voice broke the silence gently. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to see an older man standing a few steps away. He wore a long coat and wool hat, his breath visible in the cold. His face was kind, lined with age and the softness of someone who had learned to appreciate quiet moments. "It's incredible," Myra said. "I've never seen anything like it." He nodded. Silverbridge tends to stay with people, even after they leave. "Have you lived here long?" "All my life," he replied. "And every winter morning like this, I still find something new to admire." They stood together on the bridge for a moment, watching the light shift across the snow. Finally, he said, "If you follow that trail," he pointed toward a narrow path winding into the trees, "you'll find a lookout above the river. Not many visitors know about it." "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat and continued on, leaving a trail of footprints behind him. Mara followed the path he indicated. It wound gently upward through a cluster of tall pine trees. Their branches hung low under the weight of snow, creating natural arches along the trail. The air smelled of pine resin and cold earth. The only sounds were her footsteps and the occasional flutter of snow falling from a distant branch. When she reached the lookout, she stopped in awe. The river curved below like a winding ribbon of silver. The town lay nestled along its edges, smoke rising peacefully from chimneys. The mountains towered on every side, glowing softly in the winter sunlight. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction. It felt as though she were standing at the edge of a dream. She sat on a bench carved into the rock and let the stillness linger. Time passed without her noticing. The wind moved gently across the treetops. Birds chirped faintly in the branches. The sun shifted slowly across the sky, casting long rays of honey-colored light over the valley. Eventually, Mara stood and made her way back to the inn. When she arrived, the lobby was quieter. The fire crackled warmly. A new pot of tea sat on the counter with a small sign inviting guests to help themselves. She poured a cup, inhaling the steam before taking a sip. Mint, lavender, a hint of pine. She carried it upstairs to her room and set it on the windowsill. Then she sat in the chair overlooking the river and opened the journal she had brought with her. The blank pages felt welcoming, not demanding. She began writing, not about work or deadlines or goals, but about the snow, the river, the quiet breath of the town beneath the mountains. Lines filled the pages effortlessly, each word carried by the gentle peace of Silverbridge. As evening approached, the sky turned shades of lavender and rose. The lights in the town flickered on. The river caught the colors and shimmered like stained glass. Myra left her room and went downstairs for dinner. The inn's dining room was filled with the soft hum of conversation and the scent of roasted vegetables, herbs, and warm bread. She found a table near the fire and ordered a simple meal, stew with fresh bread and winter greens. Halfway through eating, the woman who ran the inn stopped by her table. "Enjoying Silverbridge so far?" she asked. "More than I expected," Myra replied. "It's peaceful in a way I didn't know I needed." The woman smiled knowingly. "That's what most travelers say. This place tends to slow the heart, quiet the mind. We see it all the time." Myra nodded. "I already feel different." "That's good," the woman said. "Stay as long as you like, breathe it in. The mountains always have more to give." After dinner, Myra returned to her room to read for a while. The night outside grew dark and still. The only sounds were the distant hush of the river and the faint whisper of wind brushing against the inn. She eventually slipped into bed, pulling the quilt over her. The warmth wrapped around her like an embrace. Her eyelids grew heavy. Before she drifted off, she thought of the night limited, the soft hum of its wheels, the glow of its lamps, the quiet journey through endless snow. She wondered if it was still traveling somewhere out in the dark, carrying new passengers, holding new moments of quiet. The thought soothed her further. Her breathing slowed. Sleep came gently. The next morning, Mara woke to the sound of light knocking on her door. The innkeeper stood outside with a small tray. "I noticed you enjoyed the morning tea yesterday," she said kindly. "Thought you might like some to start the day." Mara accepted the tray, touched by the gesture. The cup was warm in her hands, the steam fragrant and comforting. She brought it to the window and looked out again at the snow-covered valley. A soft snowfall had begun, flakes drifting slowly through the morning air. They danced with the wind before settling on rooftops, fences, and trees. Silverbridge seemed even quieter today, wrapped gently beneath the new snow. Mara decided to spend the morning exploring the town. She bundled herself in her coat and scarf, stepped outside, and walked toward the square. The snow crunched lightly beneath her boots. Children were building small snow forts near the fountain. A group of adults chatted near the bakery, sipping warm drinks. The smoke rising from chimneys seemed thicker today, curling into the cold sky. She wandered into the bookshop she had seen earlier. The moment she stepped inside, the smell of old pages and cedar shelves surrounded her. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged man with a thick knitted sweater, greeted her softly. Shelves were filled with novels, history books, journals, and maps. A small table near the window held a pot of tea and a tin of sugar cubes for customers. Mara browsed slowly, letting her fingers trail along the spines. She picked up a book of local folklore and leafed through its illustrations of mountain spirits, winter legends, and tales of the river's origins. She purchased it along with a small journal bound in soft leather. After leaving the bookshop, she continued wandering. She visited the general store, where she spoke briefly with a friendly woman who recommended a walking trail along the eastern ridge. She passed the bakery, drawn in by the scent of warm pastries. Inside, she bought a small apple tart and ate it at a nearby bench while watching snowflakes drift lazily through the square. The hours passed gently. She found herself sitting more often than walking, pausing on benches, leaning against railings, gazing up at the mountains. Silverbridge invited slowness, and she accepted the invitation fully. By late afternoon, she returned to the inn to rest. When evening came, she found herself drawn again to the riverbank. The lamps along the path glowed warmly against the growing dark. The river whispered beneath a thin sheet of ice, reflecting the soft lantern light in shimmering streaks. Mara stood by the railing, her breath forming small clouds in the air. The snow had stopped falling. The sky above Silverbridge was clear now, revealing countless stars scattered across a deep indigo canvas. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the landscape. The mountains gleamed faintly, dusted with fresh snow that caught the moonlight like scattered diamonds. Mara closed her eyes. The cold air kissed her cheeks, but the warmth inside her chest grew stronger. The world felt wide and quiet, gentle and alive. She stayed there a long time. Eventually, she returned to the inn. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly. Guests chatted in low voices. The innkeeper smiled as Mara passed, her expression warm and approving. Mara went upstairs, changed into soft clothes, and sat by her window once more. The river shimmered below, the town lights glowing faintly. Everything looked calm, safe, timeless. She opened her new journal and began to write. Words flowed easily. About the train, about the snow, about the silence that wrapped itself around her like a blanket, about the sense that she had stepped outside the noise of her life and into a place that asked nothing of her except to breathe and exist. Her writing slowed. Her eyes grew heavy. She slipped into bed again, this time falling asleep even faster, surrounded by the deep quiet of Silverbridge. In the early hours of the morning, she dreamed of the night limited moving through endless snowfields, its glowing windows cutting a warm path through the dark. She dreamed of its hum beneath her feet, its soft wooden walls, its gentle rocking motion. She dreamed of being carried through a world that asked nothing of her except rest. She woke with a lingering sense of peace. Mara spent the next morning wandering through Silverbridge with no particular destination in mind. The snowfall had thinned to a delicate flutter, drifting slowly past the lampposts and catching on the knitted edges of her hat. The valley felt hushed, as though the whole town was wrapped inside a soft winter lullaby. Paths wound past bakeries with fogged-up windows and small cottages with smoke drifting lazily from their chimneys. Each corner seemed to promise something warm, slow, and welcoming. She found herself drawn again toward the river. The water beneath the ice flowed steadily, creating faint shifting patterns where the surface thinned near the banks. The bridge she had crossed on her first morning stood like a quiet guardian, its stones dusted in white. Mara traced a gloved hand along the railing, the cold sinking gently into her fingertips. A few people passed by now and then, their footsteps muffled by the thick snow. Everyone moved unhurriedly, offering polite, soft greetings. Some were locals she recognized from the square. Others seemed to be visitors like herself, wrapped in the comforting anonymity that winter towns often gave travelers. No one demanded anything from her. No one rushed her along. She breathed deeply, feeling her lungs fill with clean, cold air. Later that afternoon, she made her way to the lookout again. The path through the pines was even quieter today, the branches sagging under the weight of fresh snowfall. The silence felt almost sacred. Snowflakes occasionally fluttered free from the trees, drifting down in slow, spiraling motions that made time feel thicker, heavier, softer. At the lookout, the valley stretched before her in its full winter glory. The mountains stood tall and silent, their slopes glowing beneath a soft veil of sunlight filtering through the clouds. The rooftops of Silverbridge looked like small, sleepy islands in a sea of shimmering white. The river curved serenely through the center, a ribbon of silver beneath the frozen surface. She sat on the bench carved into the rock again. Words from her journal drifted through her mind, phrases she hadn't realized she needed to write until she had written them. Thoughts she hadn't known were tangled until Silverbridge loosened them gently. She stayed until the cold began to nibble at her toes. Then she returned to the inn, where warm soup and bread waited for her, laid out by the innkeeper with a knowing smile. The inn had become a second home in only a few days. The crackling fire in the common room, the soft conversations drifting through the hallways, the steady kindness of the staff, it all worked together like a quiet healing. That evening, Mara found herself unable to sleep immediately. The room was warm, the quilt heavy and comforting, but her mind wasn't ready to drift just yet. Instead, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and returned to the window, watching Silverbridge rest under the moonlight. Lights from the houses glowed in soft, golden patterns. Smoke curled lazily upward. The wind carried faint whispers through the pines. Everything was still, except for the river below, always quietly moving beneath its icy shell. She opened her journal and wrote again, longer this time. She wrote about the peace she had discovered, about the quiet moments that had filled her days, about the unexpected freedom of having nowhere she needed to be and nothing urgent to accomplish. She wrote about how she wished she could bottle this feeling, save it for when life became too loud again. When sleep finally came, it came gently. The next morning brought a faint lavender glow across the valley. Mara woke earlier than usual, sensing somehow that her time in Silverbridge was approaching its end. The clock on the wall confirmed it. Her stay was nearly over. She had one more night ahead, but the thought of leaving made her chest feel strangely heavy. She spent the day savoring the town as though she wanted to memorize each detail. She returned to the bookshop to thank the shopkeeper for the recommendations. She bought another journal, knowing the first was nearly full. She sat by the river and watched chunks of ice drift beneath the surface. She visited the bakery again for a warm pastry and chatted briefly with the woman behind the counter, who shared a story about the town's winter festival that had taken place the week before. But even with all the gentle joy of the day, she knew a goodbye was waiting for her tomorrow. That night, she fell asleep quickly, wrapped in the heavy quilt. Yet somewhere in the early hours, she stirred. A low, distant sound drifted through the cold air outside. At first, she thought it was the wind. Then she realized. It was a train whistle, soft, deep, familiar, the night limited. Even though the station was a little ways down the river, the sound carried through the quiet valley with surprising clarity. Mara sat up in bed, listening. There it was again, the gentle, resonant cry of a train passing through the dark, moving toward distant towns and unfamiliar landscapes. She imagined it cutting through the snow, lanterns glowing, wheels humming. She pictured sleepy passengers tucked into warm compartments, lulled by the rocking of the rails. The sound stirred something inside her. By morning, her decision was clear. She had come here to rest. She had found peace. And now she felt ready to carry it onward, not cling to it. She packed her things slowly, folding each item carefully, pausing now and then to look out the window as Silverbridge warmed beneath winter sunlight. The river shimmered. The mountains glowed softly. The world felt quieter, but she felt stronger. Downstairs, the innkeeper greeted her with a soft smile. Heading out today? She asked. Yes, Mara said, but I think I'll be back. You will, the innkeeper replied warmly. Everyone who needs Silverbridge eventually finds their way again. Mara carried her suitcase through the quiet square. The air was crisp, but gentle sunlight warmed the roofs, sending droplets falling from the icicles. The path to the station wound beside the river, and she walked it slowly, absorbing every detail. The Silverbridge station was as charming as the rest of the town: small ticket counter, a bench, a roof dusted with snow. Only a handful of passengers waited on the platform. The air held the faint scent of pine and fresh snow. She stood at the edge of the platform, her breath visible in small clouds. Soon, she felt it, the subtle vibration beneath her boots. A soft glow appeared far down the tracks. A low hum drifted toward the station. The Night Limited approached with its same quiet grace, lanterns glowing, steam curling gently from the engine. Its brass trim reflected the winter light. As it slowed, its wheels exhaled a soft sigh against the rails. The conductor stepped out just as he had days before. His uniform was just as neat. His silver hair caught the morning sun. He offered her the same kind, calm smile. "Good morning," he said. "Headed southbound?" "Yes," Mara replied. "Back to North Pine." "Lovely ride this time of year," he said. "Snow makes everything softer." She smiled. "I know." He stepped aside. She boarded the train. Warm air met her again, carrying the familiar scent of wool, wood, and tea. The corridor glowed softly. Everything felt exactly as it had the night she arrived, and yet everything inside her felt different. Her compartment was ready: 2 neatly folded blankets, a polished window, a small kettle on the table, the hum of the rails beginning beneath her feet as the train prepared to depart. She sat by the window as the Night Limited began to glide forward. Silverbridge slipped away behind her, its roofs dusted in snow, its river shimmering, its mountains standing tall in the morning light. The bridge arched silently over the river. The chimneys released soft trails of smoke. And then, slowly, gently, the town disappeared beyond the curve of the valley. The train picked up speed. The snow outside began to drift again. The mountains rose and fell around her. Mara leaned back in her seat, wrapped in the soft burgundy blanket, a cup of warm tea in her hands. The Night Limited moved steadily through the winter world, carrying her not away from Silverbridge, but forward, with everything she had gained there, everything she now carried inside her. The rhythm of the rails soothed her. The snow whispered against the window. Her breathing slowed. She felt calm. She felt full. And as the train continued into the quiet, endless stretch of winter landscape, Mara closed her eyes and let herself drift peacefully, the warmth of the journey holding her gently, carrying her through the snowy day toward whatever waited next.